In a city run on blood and extortion, the apex predators don't care about collateral damage. Damian Reed owned the streets, the cops, and the underground. He didn't do mercy. But when he smelled copper and cheap medical tape beneath the sweet scent of his coat-check boy, the city's unwritten rules cracked. Toby was a nobody, an unbonded Omega trying to survive. Whoever put those bruises on his ribs didn't just hurt a kid. They signed their own death warrant. The air inside the alibi was always heavy. It was a calculated mixture of expensive cigar smoke, spilled top-shelf bourbon, and the pheromones of the city's worst people pretending to be its best. Damian Reed stood on the mezzanine, a glass of water in his hand, watching the casino floor. He didn't drink alcohol while his clubs were operating. He didn't do a lot of things the men in his position were expected to do. He didn't gamble. He didn't flaunt Omegas on his arm. He just watched. Being an alpha in the syndicates wasn't about roaring or posturing. It was about seeing the fracture lines in a room before anyone else knew the glass was broken. His eyes tracked over the high rollers' tables past the roulette wheels and settled on the cloakroom. Toby was 19. He was a slip of a thing drowning in a heavily starched white shirt and a black polyester vest that belonged to the club's uniform supplier. Toby was an Omega. He wasn't bonded, and he didn't wear a collar. Just a thin frayed scarf to cover his gland from the casual predatory stares of the patrons. Damian had hired him 3 months ago because the kid had looked him dead in the eye during the interview, terrified, but entirely unwilling to blink. Usually Toby smelled like cheap vanilla body wash and the faint dusty scent of old paper. It was a quiet scent. It didn't demand attention. Damian liked that. It grounded the chaotic noise of the club. Tonight, the vanilla was gone. Damian inhaled slowly through his nose. His grip on the water glass tightened the condensation slick against his palm. The barometric pressure in Damian's head shifted the biological hum of a territorial alpha registering a problem. Beneath the overwhelming stench of the casino wafting up from the coat-check counter was the sharp metallic tang of copper. Blood. And beneath that, the acrid, sour chemical smell of an Omega in deep, prolonged physical distress. Down below, a drunken patron, a city alderman. Damian was currently bribing, shoved a heavy soaked wool overcoat across the counter. Toby reached for it. As the weight of the wet wool transferred to the boy's hands, Toby's entire body locked. Damian saw it from 50 feet away. Toby didn't cry out. His jaw snapped shut. His shoulders hiked up to his ears, and his knees gave out for a fraction of a second. The heavy coat slipped, hitting the floor with a wet thud. "What the hell is wrong with you?" The alderman barked, his face flushed with gin. He leaned over the counter, invading Toby's space. "Pick it up." Toby dropped to his knees out of sight. When he stood back up, he was clutching the coat to his chest, his breathing shallow and rapid. He smiled. It was a brittle, awful thing. He handed the alderman a ticket. The man snatched it and walked away, grumbling about minimum wage incompetence. Damian set his glass down. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. Cold Damian's head of security stepped out of the shadows. "Boss." "Go down to the cloakroom," Damian said. His voice was entirely flat. "Relieve Toby. Bring him to my office." Cole followed Damian's eyeline. He nodded once. "Is there a problem?" "We're about to find out." Damian turned and walked down the dark corridor toward his office. The walls were lined with soundproofing foam, disguised behind rich mahogany panels. The heavy oak door shut behind him with a solid click, sealing out the noise of the casino. He sat behind his desk. He waited. 5 minutes later, a soft knock echoed through the room. "Come in," Damien called out. The door opened. Cole stood in the frame, ushering Toby inside, before shutting the door behind him, leaving them alone. Toby stood in the center of the plush rug. He looked like he was standing before a firing squad. His hands were clasped in front of him, the knuckles white. His breathing was still wrong, too short, too tight. He was taking shallow sips of air deliberately, keeping his chest from expanding. The scent of blood was stronger in the enclosed space. It wasn't fresh. It was dried, mixed with a distinct chalky odor of cheap, over-the-counter pain medication. "Mr. Reed," Toby said. His voice trembled, though he tried to suppress it. "If this is about the coat, I apologize. The fabric slipped. It won't happen again." Damien leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. He looked at the boy. Toby's skin was pale, a stark contrast to the dark circles under his eyes. There was a faint sheen of cold sweat on his forehead. "It's not about the coat, Toby." Toby swallowed hard. "Am I fired?" "No." Damien stood up. He walked around the desk. He didn't try to project his alpha aura. In fact, he pulled it back, reining in his pheromones to keep the room entirely neutral. He didn't want to terrify the kid more than he already was. "Take off the vest." Toby froze. His eyes widened, a flash of pure, unadulterated panic crossing his features. "Sir." "The vest, Toby. And unbutton the shirt." I don't." Toby took a step back. His hands went defensively to his chest. "Mr. Reed, please. I just want to work. I need this job." "You're keeping the job," Damien said softly. He stopped a few feet away, keeping a respectful distance. "But you're bleeding, and you're in pain. You've been trying to hide it all night, but you're doing a miserable job of it. Show me." "I fell." Toby lied. It was a reflexive practice lie. The kind of lie you tell when you're used to no one believing you anyway. "People who fall don't smell like fear," Damien said. "Unbutton the shirt." Toby stared at the floor. The silence stretched. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. Slowly, with shaking fingers, Toby reached up and unfastened the top button of his uniform shirt. Then the next. He didn't take the shirt off entirely. He just parted the fabric. Damien's breath stopped in his throat. The left side of Toby's torso was a ruined landscape of violence. The bruising started just below his collarbone and disappeared past the waistband of his uniform trousers. It wasn't just a bruise. It was a systematic beating. The skin was mottled with horrific shades of sickly yellow, necrotic purple, and angry, swelling black. Dead center on his ribs, precisely where Toby had been guarding, was the distinct crescent-shaped indentation of a steel-toed work boot. The skin there had split, oozing sluggishly through a makeshift bandage made of paper towels and cheap electrical tape. It was the kind of beating meant to incapacitate, not kill. A reminder, a debt collector's signature. Damien felt the alpha in his blood surge a primal violent roaring that threatened to snap his vision to red. He forced it down. He couldn't lose control. Not here. Not in front of the kid. "Sit down," Damien ordered. His voice was rougher than he intended. Toby flinched, pulling the shirt closed. "I can work. I swear I can work. Just let me—" "Sit on the couch, Toby, now." Toby moved stiffly to the leather sofa and sat on the edge of the cushions. He kept his arms wrapped around his torso. Damien walked over to a wet bar in the corner. He grabbed a clean towel, ran it under the cold tap, and poured a measure of antiseptic over it from a first aid kit in the cabinet. He brought it over, kneeling on the floor in front of Toby. Toby shrank back. "Don't. Please." "I'm not going to hurt you," Damien said. He kept his movements slow, deliberate. "But that tape is pulling at the skin and the paper towel is infected. I need to take it off." Toby hesitated, then slowly let his hands fall away. Damien peeled the electrical tape back. Toby let out a sharp, choked gasp, tears immediately springing to his eyes. Damien ignored the sound, working with clinical efficiency. He wiped the dried blood away, cleaned the split skin over the rib, and applied a sterile gauze pad, taping it down with proper medical adhesive. "Who?" Damien asked. He didn't look up from his hands. Toby looked away. "Nobody. It was just a misunderstanding in my neighborhood. I run this city's underground, Toby," Damien said quietly. He sat back on his heels, finally looking up to meet the boy's eyes. "I know the handiwork of every enforcer, every leg breaker, and every low-rent loan shark from the docks to the financial district. That boot print is specific. Someone kicked you when you were already down, hard enough to fracture at least 2 ribs. Give me a name." "You'll fire me if you know," Toby whispered. The cynical edge of a kid who had grown up on the streets bled into his voice. "I'm a liability. Employers don't like liabilities. You let me worry about my liabilities. Name." Toby closed his eyes. A tear slipped free, cutting a path down his cheek. "Warren. Frank Warren." Damien knew the name. Frank Warren ran a small, brutal extortion racket down by the rail yards. He targeted omegas and betas who didn't have alpha protection, lending them money at exorbitant rates and then using them as punching bags when they inevitably defaulted. He was a bottom feeder, a rat surviving on the scraps the syndicates left behind. "Why do you owe Warren money?" Damien asked. "My mother," Toby said, his voice hollow. "She needed suppressants, the medical-grade ones. The over-the-counter stuff stopped working and she was getting sick. I didn't have the cash. I borrowed $2,000. I paid back $3,000. He said the interest compounded. Said I owe him another $5,000. Damien stared at the boy. $5,000. To a man like Damien, it was the price of a bottle of wine at dinner. To Toby, it was a death sentence. He caught me outside my apartment yesterday. Toby continued his words, spilling out now that the dam was broken. Said if I didn't have the money by Friday, he was going to take it out and trade. Sell my contract to a brothel in the Narrows. Damien stood up. He walked back to his desk and picked up his phone. He pressed a single button. "Cole," Damien said. "Get Dr. Harrison up here, now, and bring the car around to the back alley. Bring the heavy gear." He hung up. Toby looked panicked. "What are you doing?" "Please, Mr. Reed, don't get involved. Warren has guys, vicious guys. He'll—" Toby, Damien interrupted. The barometric pressure in the room dropped completely. The air grew heavy, suffocatingly dense with the sheer force of Damien's intent. "Warren is a dead man?" Toby stared at him, paralyzed. "You work for me," Damien said, straightening his suit jacket. "In my city, nobody touches my people. Nobody." The rail yard was a rusted graveyard of shipping containers and decommissioned train cars. It smelled of diesel, wet iron, and garbage. Frank Warren operated out of an old dispatcher's booth elevated above the tracks. It was 2 a.m. Damien stood at the edge of the gravel lot. The rain had started to fall, a cold, miserable drizzle that slicked his dark hair to his forehead. He didn't flinch against it. Behind him stood Cole and 4 other men. They weren't street thugs. They wore tactical gear carrying suppressed submachine guns and heavy steel batons. They were professionals. 3 guys at the bottom of the stairs, Cole murmured, looking through a thermal optic. 2 inside the booth with Warren. "Take the guys on the stairs," Damien said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Non-lethal. I want them awake to watch." Cole gave a hand signal. The assault took less than 40 seconds. There was no shouting, just the sickening crack of steel batons meeting kneecaps and jawbones. The 3 men at the base of the stairs folded like cheap lawn chairs, writhing in the wet gravel, their groans muffled by the rain. Damien walked past them, his leather shoes crunching methodically on the rocks. He climbed the metal stairs. The door to the dispatcher's booth was locked. Cole stepped forward, leveled a shotgun with a breaching round at the hinges, and blew the door inward. Damien stepped inside. The air was thick with stale beer and stale smoke. The 2 thugs inside were reaching for their weapons. Cole and another man dropped them instantly, with precise calculated strikes to the throat and solar plexus. They hit the floor, gasping for air. Frank Warren was sitting behind a metal desk, his face pale, his hands raised. He was a large alpha running to fat, wearing a cheap tracksuit. When he saw Damien Reed step into the harsh fluorescent light of the booth, all the blood drained from his face. "Mr. Reed," Warren stammered. I didn't know you were coming down here. We pay our tribute to the syndicate. We're fully paid up." Damien didn't say a word. He walked slowly across the room. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a pair of black leather driving gloves, and methodically pulled them onto his hands. The leather snapped tight over his knuckles. "Did I offend someone?" Warren asked, his voice cracking. He was backing his chair up, but it hit the wall behind him. "Whatever it is, I can fix it. Money territory." "You name it." Damien stopped in front of the desk. He leaned over it. "You wear steel-toed boots, Frank?" Damien asked quietly. Warren blinked, utterly confused by the question. Yeah, sometimes. The yard is dangerous." Damien nodded slowly. "Let's see them." "Look, Mr. Reed, I don't understand." Damien moved with a speed that defied his size. His hand shot across the desk, grabbing Warren by the throat. He hauled the heavier man up and over the desk, slamming him down onto the dirty linoleum floor. The desk crashed backward. Warren choked, clawing at Damien's grip, releasing waves of panicked alpha pheromones. Damien didn't even flinch. His own scent flared, crushing dominant predatory pine and ash, forcing Warren's instincts into immediate, terrifying submission. "Hold his legs," Damien told Cole. Cole stepped on Warren's ankles, pinning him to the floor. Damien knelt beside Warren's head. He kept his grip on the man's throat, restricting the air just enough to keep him conscious, but helpless. "You visited a kid yesterday," Damien said. His tone was conversational, which made it infinitely more terrifying. "A Kochek boy, Toby." Warren's eyes widened in realization. He owes me." "He owes you nothing," Damien whispered, leaning in close. "Because you don't exist anymore." Damien released Warren's throat. Before Warren could suck in a breath, Damien raised his right fist and brought it down like a hammer into the center of Warren's chest. There was a sharp, loud crack as a rib gave way. Warren screamed a wet, agonizing sound. "That's for the left side," Damien said coldly. He brought his fist down again, slightly lower. Another break. "That's for the right." Warren was sobbing now, begging spittle flying from his lips. Damien stood up. He smoothed the lapels of his coat. He looked down at the broken man on the floor. "Burn the ledgers," he told Cole. "Empty the safe. Take every cent he has, then set the cars in the yard on fire." "What about him?" Cole asked, nodding to Warren. "Break his right hand, every finger. Then leave him for the cops. By tomorrow morning, I want it known from the harbor to the high-rises. The Toby Hayes debt is canceled." Damien turned and walked out of the booth, leaving the sounds of breaking bones and shattering glass behind him. The city was going to wake up to a burning skyline and a terrifying new reality. The untouchable king of the underworld had just dismantled an entire operation, ruined a man's life, and burned a fortune in illicit cash. And he did it for an unbonded Omega who held coats at a nightclub. Damien walked back to his car, the rain washing the blood from his leather gloves. He didn't care what the city thought. He didn't care about the whispers that would start tomorrow. He only cared about the terrified kid sitting in his office and making sure nobody ever made him bleed again. The heavy oak door of Damien's office clicked shut behind him, sealing away the relentless manufactured energy of the casino floor. It was 4:15 a.m. The rain had followed him back from the rail yard, soaking the shoulders of his wool coat. He smelled of wet asphalt diesel fuel and the sharp, undeniable scent of ozone that always accompanied a massive release of alpha pheromones. Inside the office, the ambient lighting had been dimmed. Dr. Harrison, a discreet gray-haired beta who had patched up more bullet holes for the syndicate than the city hospital, was snapping his leather medical bag shut. On the leather sofa, Toby sat rigidly upright. He was wearing an oversized, clean gray T-shirt that Harrison must have pulled from the club's emergency locker. He looked incredibly small. The heavy medical tape holding his ribs together was visible through the thin cotton. "How is he?" Damien asked, shrugging off his wet coat and tossing it over a chair. Harrison kept his voice low professional. "2 hairline fractures on the 7th and 8th ribs. Severe deep tissue contusions, mild dehydration. I've administered a local anesthetic to numb the immediate pain and wrapped his chest to restrict movement. He needs rest. No heavy lifting. Absolutely no reaching over his head." The doctor paused, glancing at Toby before looking back at Damien. "And he needs to eat something that didn't come out of a vending machine." "Understood," Damien said. "Thank you, doctor. Cole will see you out." Harrison nodded, picked up his bag, and left the room. Silence descended on the office. It wasn't a comfortable silence. Toby stared at a fixed point on the Persian rug, his fingers picking nervously at the hem of the oversized shirt. He hadn't looked at Damien once. Damien walked to his desk. He poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe, walked over to the sofa, and held it out. Toby looked at the glass, then slowly trailed his eyes up Damien's arm to his face. The boy's nose twitched. Omegas possessed an incredibly acute sense of smell, heavily tied to their survival instincts. Toby was cataloging the scents clinging to Damien. "You smell like smoke," Toby whispered. His voice was hoarse. "I burned some trash," Damien said flatly. He kept the glass extended until Toby tentatively reached out and took it. Toby took a small sip. The water trembled in the glass, betraying the severe shaking in his hands. He swallowed hard. "Frank Warren. Frank Warren is currently learning how to breathe through a tube at St. Jude's Memorial." Damien answered, his tone completely devoid of boastfulness. It was a simple statement of fact. His operation is ash. His ledgers are gone. His money has been redistributed to my security staff as a bonus. Toby's breath hitched. He closed his eyes, his pale throat working as he tried to swallow down the rising panic. You shouldn't have done that. You don't know the rules down here. The syndicates. I write the rules, Toby. Damien pulled a leather chair from across the room and sat down opposite the sofa. He leaned forward and resting his forearms on his knees, putting himself at eye level with the boy. The debt is gone. Toby opened his eyes. There was no relief in them, only a stark, deeply ingrained cynicism. He looked at Damien like a rabbit looks at a snare. Nothing is gone. Debt doesn't disappear, Mr. Reed. It just changes hands. Damien didn't argue. He understood the boy's logic. In Toby's world, generosity was always a trap. Oh, so what is it? Toby asked. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to hold Damien's gaze. It was that same terrified, unblinking defiance from his job interview. What's my new interest rate? Do I owe you the $5,000 now? Or does the fact that you broke his legs mean the price went up? You owe me nothing. Bullshit, Toby snapped. The curse slipped out before he could catch it. He flinched immediately, curling his shoulders inward, anticipating a strike for his disrespect. Alphas didn't tolerate Omegas swearing at them. Damien didn't move. He kept his pheromones aggressively neutral, a blank slate of scent. He waited until Toby realized he wasn't going to be hit. I'm sorry, Toby whispered, staring back at the rug. I know how this works. I'm 19, Mr. Reed, but I'm not stupid. Men like you don't mobilize a hit squad at 2 a.m. because the coat check boy has a bruised rib. You want something, a contract, a bond. Whatever it is, just tell me. I can't play guessing games. I don't have the energy. I want you to heal, Damien said. Toby let out a bitter, exhausted sound that was half laugh, half sob. Right, okay. And then you come back to work. If you want to. Damien sat back in the chair. I am an alpha, Toby. I run a violent business in a violent city. I am not a good man, but I do not buy people, and I do not tolerate predators feeding in my territory. Toby looked up, searching Damien's face for the lie. He looked for the subtle smirk, the predatory glint in the eye, the possessive flare of scent. He found nothing but steady, terrifyingly calm certainty. My mother, Toby said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper, she needs the suppressants. The money I borrowed, I used it for rent. I haven't bought her medication yet. I know, Damien said. I'll handle it. No? Toby panicked, trying to stand up. A sharp bolt of pain shot through his ribs, and he collapsed back onto the cushions with a sharp hiss. You can't. You've done too much. I can't owe you for that, too. Please. Damien stood up. He walked over to the desk, picked up his phone, and typed out a quick message. He didn't look back at Toby as he spoke. You are going to sleep on that sofa tonight. The door locks from the inside. Nobody will bother you. Tomorrow my driver will take you home. You have 2 weeks of paid medical leave. Damien turned around. This isn't a negotiation, Toby. Stop trying to survive me. I'm the only person in this city right now trying to keep you breathing. Damien walked toward the door. He stopped with his hand on the brass knob. Lock the door behind me, Damien said. He stepped out into the hallway and pulled the door shut. A moment later, he heard the heavy deadbolt slide into place. Damien stood in the empty corridor for a long time, listening to the muffled, ragged sound of Toby finally breaking down and crying on the other side of the wood. The city woke up to the smell of smoke and the frantic hum of the morning news cycle. Frank Warren's operation hadn't just been dismantled, it had been surgically eradicated. The police found him tied to a lamppost outside the precinct, both hands shattered, completely catatonic. The local news anchors called it a turf war. The street-level operators knew better. Turf wars were messy. They involved drive-bys and collateral damage. This was an execution of a business model. It was a message. 3 days passed. Toby's apartment was located in the Narrows, a district where the city's infrastructure had seemingly given up. The streetlights flickered, the sidewalks were cracked, and the air always smelled faintly of damp garbage and rust. His building was a 4-story walk-up with peeling green paint and a buzzer system that hadn't worked since the late 90s. Damien parked his black sedan at the curb. He didn't bring coal. He didn't bring security. He stepped out onto the cracked pavement carrying a small, unmarked insulated bag. He climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor, navigating the narrow, poorly lit hallway. He stopped at apartment 3B. He knocked twice. There was a long pause. He could hear the faint sound of a television playing inside, followed by the shuffling of feet. The peephole darkened. A deadbolt clicked. A chain rattled. The door opened 2 inches. Toby peered through the gap. He looked exhausted. He was wearing a faded, oversized hoodie that swallowed his frame, the thick fabric intentionally chosen to hide his torso. When he saw Damien standing in the dim hallway, his eyes widened, and he instinctively took a step back, pulling the door with him. The chain snapped taut. "Mr. Reed," Toby said. His voice was breathless, defensive. "Good afternoon, Toby," Damien said. He kept his voice low, projecting calm. He didn't push against the door. He stayed exactly where he was, leaving plenty of space between them. "May I come in?" Toby hesitated. He looked down the hallway as if expecting a squad of enforcers to step out of the shadows. My mother is resting. It's not a good time." "I understand. I won't stay long." Damien held up the insulated bag. "I brought the medication." Toby stared at the bag. The internal war playing out on his face was agonizing to watch. Pride, fear, and absolute crushing necessity fought a brutal battle behind his eyes. Finally, necessity won. It always did when you were desperate. Toby reached out with trembling fingers and unlatched the chain. He pulled the door open and stepped back, making himself as small as possible against the entryway wall. Damien stepped inside. The apartment was tiny, but aggressively clean. It smelled of cheap lemon cleaner and old soup. The furniture was threadbare, patched with mismatched fabric. In the corner of the main room, behind a faded room divider, lay a small bed. A woman was sleeping there, her breathing shallow and ragged. The air in the apartment was heavy with the sour, chaotic scent of an older Omuga going through severe, unregulated hormonal spikes. Damien walked to the small kitchenette. He set the insulated bag on the laminate counter. He unzipped it and pulled out 4 rectangular white boxes. "These are pharmaceutical-grade suppressants," Damien said quietly, keeping his back to the sleeping woman to afford her privacy. "Not the diluted variants they sell at the corner clinics. There are enough doses here to stabilize her system for 6 months. The instructions are printed on the labels." Toby stood by the front door, his arms wrapped around his stomach. He was staring at the white boxes like they were explosive devices. "How much?" Toby asked. His voice was devoid of emotion. It was the deadened tone of someone preparing for a blow. "They cost you nothing," Damien replied. "Stop doing that." Toby said, his voice suddenly rising, cracking with a sudden desperate anger. He took a step forward. "Just stop. Nobody gives away 6 months of medical-grade suppressants. They cost thousands of dollars. Nobody burns down a loan shark's operation for free. Tell me what you want from me. Do you want me to sleep with you? Do you want me to carry a package? Just tell me the price so I can figure out if I can pay it." The outburst echoed in the small apartment. The woman behind the divider stirred, murmuring in her sleep. Toby instantly froze, clamping a hand over his mouth, terrified he had woken her. Damien didn't react to the yelling. He looked at the boy. He saw the violent trembling in Toby's shoulders, the way he favored his left side, the sheer exhaustion radiating from his scent. "The price," Damien said softly, "is that you lock your door at night. The price is that you give your mother her medication so she stops suffering. The price is that you rest until Dr. Harrison clears you to carry heavy coats again." Toby lowered his hand. Tears were welling in his eyes, spilling over his lashes. He looked utterly broken by the lack of cruelty. "I don't understand you. You're used to monsters, Toby," Damien said. He walked slowly back toward the front door. As he passed Toby, he stopped, leaving 2 feet of space between them. He didn't reach out. He didn't touch him. "I am a monster to the people who hurt what belongs in my city. But you are under my roof. You work in my club. That makes you mine to protect, not mine to use." Damien reached out and placed his hand on the doorknob. "Call Dr. Harrison if her fever doesn't break by tomorrow morning," Damien instructed. "He is fully paid for. Do not hesitate to use him." Damien opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. "Mr. Reed," Toby called out softly. Damien paused, looking back. Toby was staring at the white boxes on the counter. He reached up and wiped roughly at his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The crippling, sour scent of fear that constantly clung to him had faded, replaced by something faint and confused and incredibly fragile. "Thank you," Toby whispered. "Rest, Toby," Damien said. He pulled the door shut. He waited in the hallway until he heard the deadbolt slide into place, followed by the heavy rattle of the security chain. Only then did he walk back down the stairs, leaving the quiet behind. 2 weeks is a strange measurement of time. In the Narrows, 2 weeks was usually the difference between eviction and starvation. For Toby, it was the time it took for the horrific black and purple tapestry across his ribs to fade into a sickly, mottled yellow. It was also the exact amount of time it took for the suffocating, sour scent of sickness in his apartment to vanish. His mother was sitting at the small laminate kitchen table when Toby walked out of the bathroom, buttoning his crisp white uniform shirt. She was holding a mug of cheap instant coffee. Her hands weren't shaking. The hollow gray pallor that had haunted her cheeks for months was gone, replaced by the natural warm flush of a stabilized Omega. She looked 10 years younger. Toby paused, his fingers lingering on the middle button of his shirt. He watched her take a sip of coffee and smile at the static hum of the small television on the counter. It felt like a trap. His brain, wired for catastrophic failure, kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. He checked the hallway 3 times a night. He scrutinized the shadows in the stairwell. But nobody came. Frank Warren's name had become a ghost story, whispered by corner boys. A cautionary tale of what happens when you step on the wrong shadow. Damien Reed hadn't called. He hadn't demanded a favor. He had simply enforced a perimeter and walked away. "You look nice, honey," his mother said, pulling him from his thoughts. She set the mug down. "Are you sure you're ready to go back? The doctor said no heavy lifting." "It's just coats, Mom," Toby said, forcing a reassuring smile. He grabbed his black polyester vest from the back of a chair. He didn't wince as he pulled it on. The sharp stabbing agony in his chest had dulled to a stiff, persistent ache. It was manageable. "I need to get back to work. I've missed 2 paychecks." She nodded, though a flicker of worry remained in her eyes. "You'll thank Mr. Reed for me. Truly thank him. I don't know why a man like that helped us, but I say a prayer for him every night." Toby swallowed the bitter knot in his throat. A man like that doesn't need prayers, he thought. He needs alibis. "I'll tell him." An hour later, Toby stepped through the heavy brass doors of the alibi. The sensory assault was immediate. The clinking of crystal, the low thumping bass line of the jazz band, and the overwhelming cocktail of expensive perfumes and arrogant pheromones hit him like a physical wall. He kept his head down, navigating the edges of the casino floor toward the cloakroom. He clocked in. He arranged his numbered tickets. He smoothed his vest. Then he looked up. Damian Reed was standing on the mezzanine exactly where he had been 2 weeks ago. He was wearing a charcoal suit, a glass of water in his hand. He was looking down at the floor, observing the chaotic machinery of his empire. Toby's breath hitched. A strange, confusing warmth bloomed in his chest, instantly warring with his ingrained survival instincts. He expected Damian to look at him with ownership. He expected a nod to summon some silent acknowledgement that Toby was now a piece of property bought and paid for with a broken loan shark and a bag of pills. Damian's eyes swept over the cloakroom. They locked onto Toby. For 2 seconds the club disappeared. The crushing noise faded. Damian looked at him, his expression completely unreadable. He noted the way Toby was standing, checking for a wince or a guarded posture. Finding none, Damian simply blinked, broke the eye contact, and turned his attention back to a high-stakes poker table near the bar. That was it. No summons, no smirk, no claim. Toby exhaled a shaky breath, his hands gripping the edge of the mahogany counter. He was just an employee again. The sheer terrifying relief of it nearly made his knees buckle. The shift dragged on. By midnight, the club was packed. Toby was busy taking coats, handing out tickets, moving with careful, measured steps to avoid aggravating his ribs. He was sliding a heavy mink stole onto a hanger when a shadow fell over the counter. "Hey, sweetheart." Toby froze. The scent hit him first, cheap gin, and the aggressive, sour musk of an alpha looking to throw his weight around. Toby turned around. A man in a rumpled suit was leaning heavily on the counter. He didn't have a coat. He was just staring at Toby, a sloppy, predatory grin on his face. "You're new?" the man slurred, reaching across the counter. "I like 'em small." "You off at 2?" Toby took a step back, his spine hitting the wall of coats behind him. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded his veins. "Sir, if you don't have a coat to check, I need to ask you to clear the counter." "Don't play hard to get," the man sneered. He lunged forward, his large hand snapping out to grab Toby's wrist. Toby squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the pull, bracing for the pain in his ribs. The grip never came. Instead, there was a dull, sickening thud. Toby opened his eyes. The drunk alpha was no longer leaning on the counter. He was pinned face first against the nearest marble pillar. Cole had one massive hand pressed firmly into the back of the man's neck, bending his arm behind his back at an agonizing angle. "The boy asked you to clear the counter," Cole said. His voice was conversational, barely audible over the jazz band, but it carried the chilling promise of extreme violence. "Do you know who I am?" the man sputtered, struggling against the security chief's grip. "I know who you used to be before I threw you out the back door," Cole replied. He didn't look at the man. He looked at Toby. "You okay, kid?" Toby nodded mutely, his eyes wide. Cole hauled the Alpha backward and dragged him toward the exit, the man's heels leaving scuff marks on the polished floor. Toby stood frozen behind the counter. He looked up at the mezzanine. Damien wasn't looking at the poker tables anymore. He was looking directly at the cloakroom. When he saw that Toby was unharmed, he gave a single microscopic nod, turned, and walked toward his office. Toby realized then, with a profound, terrifying clarity, that he wasn't just safe. He was untouchable. In a city where Omegas were treated as currency, Damien Reed had quietly turned Toby into the most heavily guarded vault in the syndicate. Winter hit the city like a swung pipe. The rain turned to sleet, and the sleet turned to a bitter biting ice that coated the streets and kept the casual gamblers at home. The alibi was quieter on Tuesdays, filled mostly with the hardcore regulars and the syndicate's own lieutenants conducting quiet business in the velvet booths. It had been 3 months since the incident at the rail yard. Toby was no longer the terrified, flinching boy who hid behind the coats. He had filled out slightly the hollows of his cheeks, replaced by a healthy softness. The constant gnawing anxiety that used to dictate his every movement had settled into a quiet, watchful calm. His scent had returned completely. The sharp tang of fear was entirely gone, replaced by the rich, comforting aroma of warm vanilla and old books. It spilled over the cloakroom counter, a soft grounding anchor in the chaotic club. At 1 a.m., Cole walked up to the cloakroom. He didn't say a word. He just tapped his knuckles twice on the mahogany wood and tilted his head toward the back hallway. Toby knew the signal. He finished hanging a patron's trench coat, wiped his hands on a towel, and followed the security chief. Damien's office was stiflingly warm. The heavy oak door shut behind Toby, cutting off the jazz music. Damien was sitting behind his massive desk, his suit jacket discarded over a chair, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. He was staring at a sprawling mess of ledgers and shipping manifests. The room smelled of sharp pine and burning ash. It was Damien's scent, but it was jagged, unregulated. It was the scent of an alpha under immense grinding stress. Toby didn't wait for permission. He walked over to the wet bar in the corner. He bypassed the crystal water carafes and the expensive bourbon. Instead, he pulled a small electric kettle from the lower cabinet, something he had brought in himself 2 weeks ago, and clicked it on. Damien didn't look up, but his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch at the sound of the boiling water. "The docks are a mess," Damien said, his voice gravelly with exhaustion. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "The Maroney family is trying to reroute our shipments through the South Port. They're probing for weaknesses, testing the perimeter." It was a staggering shift in their dynamic. Damien Reed, the untouchable apex predator of the city, had started speaking his thoughts aloud when Toby was in the room. He didn't ask for advice. He didn't expect Toby to understand the intricacies of mob logistics. He just needed to speak the pressure into existence to someone who wasn't looking to exploit it. Toby dropped a chamomile tea bag into a ceramic mug and poured the hot water. "Maroney, that's the older alpha with the silver cane. Comes in on Why? Toby walked over to the desk and set the steaming mug carefully next to a stack of manifests. He tipped me $100 bill last week. Said to make sure his coat wasn't hung next to anything cheap. He's arrogant, Damien muttered, reaching for the mug. The warmth of the tea seemed to bleed into his hands. Arrogance makes men stupid. Maybe, Toby said quietly. He didn't retreat to the sofa as he usually did. He stood by the edge of the desk, looking at the papers. But his coat smelled like diesel and raw fish. It's a specific smell. The Southport handles mostly dry goods and textiles. The Northport handles the fishing trawlers. Damien stopped with the mug halfway to his mouth. He slowly lowered it back to the desk. The crushing, heavy scent of ash in the room suddenly sharpened, crystallizing into intense focus. He looked at Toby, really looked at him. Say that again. The Northport handles the commercial fishing lines. Toby repeated, his voice steady. He wasn't intimidated by the sudden intensity of Damien's gaze. If Maroney is spending enough time down there to get the scent of raw fish permanently woven into a $5,000 cashmere coat, he isn't routing your shipments south. He's moving them north. The Southport is a distraction. Silence stretched across the office. The only sound was the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Damien slowly stood up. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet from Toby. The sheer physical presence of the man was overwhelming, but Toby didn't take a step back. He tilted his head up, meeting Damien's dark, calculating eyes. You notice the smell of his coat? Damien said, his voice dropping an octave, slipping into the low resonant register of a deeply impressed alpha. I notice a lot of things, Mr. Reed, Toby said. I grew up invisible. When nobody looks at you, you get very good at looking at them. Damien reached out. It was a slow, deliberate movement. Toby's breath caught, but he didn't flinch. Damien's large, calloused hand gently brushed against the side of Toby's neck, his thumb resting just above the collar of Toby's shirt, inches away from his scent gland. The touch was electric. It sent a jolt of pure instinctual heat straight down Toby's spine. Damien inhaled deeply. The chaotic ash and pine in the room smoothed out, wrapping around Toby's vanilla scent in a seamless, protective embrace. It wasn't a claim. It was an acknowledgement. You're not invisible here, Toby, Damien whispered. His thumb traced a microscopic line against Toby's pulse point. The beat under his skin was racing, but it wasn't from fear. And you're right. Maroney is playing me. Damien let his hand fall away, breaking the physical contact, though the heavy magnetic pull between them lingered in the air. He turned back to his desk and pressed the intercom button. Cole, Damien ordered. Pull a strike team. We're paying a visit to the Northport. Right away, boss. Damien looked back at Toby. The exhaustion in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, lethal clarity. Go back to the floor. Stay near Cole's men until your shift ends. My driver will take you home. Toby nodded. He turned toward the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. Ribs that no longer hurt ribs that were protected by the most dangerous man in the city. As Toby pulled the heavy oak door open, Damien's voice caught him. Toby! Toby paused, looking over his shoulder. Damien was standing behind his desk, the apex predator, ready to go to war. But his expression was softer than Toby had ever seen it. Thank you for the tea. Toby offered a small, genuine smile. Don't get shot, Mr. Reed. I don't plan to, Damien replied. Toby walked out, letting the door click shut. He stood in the hallway for a moment, the heat of Damien's touch still burning on his skin. He wasn't just a coat check boy anymore. And Damien Reed wasn't just a boss. The lines hadn't just blurred. They had been entirely redrawn in ash and vanilla. The North Port was a desolate stretch of concrete and rusted iron that jutted out into the freezing Atlantic. At 3 in the morning, the wind coming off the water was sharp enough to draw blood. It smelled of dead fish brine and the heavy black exhaust of idling diesel engines. Damien stepped out of his SUV. Cole and 12 heavily armed men fanned out behind him, their boots silent on the ice-slicked pavement. 50 yards ahead, hidden behind a maze of towering corrugated steel shipping containers, a massive cargo transfer was underway. Floodlights cut through the sleet. Men in heavy parkas were operating forklifts, moving unmarked wooden crates from a commercial fishing trawler to a line of waiting box trucks. Standing on the loading dock, leaning heavily on a silver-headed cane, was Albert Maroney. Damien didn't bother with a stealth approach. He didn't need to. He walked directly into the harsh glare of the floodlights, his dark wool coat snapping in the bitter wind. Maroney's perimeter guards saw him first. 2 men reached inside their jackets. They didn't even manage to clear their holsters before Cole's snipers positioned on the massive gantry cranes above put suppressed rounds into the concrete inches from their boots. The sharp crack of the bullets hitting stone echoed across the harbor. The machinery stopped. The forklifts idled. The loading dock fell into a sudden, terrified silence. Maroney turned around. The older Alpha's face was a map of deep wrinkles and sudden, profound shock. He gripped his silver cane, his knuckles turning white. "Albert!" Damien called out. His voice carried over the wind, completely calm entirely, devoid of the rage that usually accompanied a syndicate betrayal. It was the tone of a man calculating a ledger. "You're a long way from the South Port." Maroney's men looked at each other, their hands hovering near their weapons, waiting for an order that would inevitably get them all killed. They were surrounded. Damien's men stepped out from the shadows of the shipping containers, assault rifles raised and leveled. "Damien," Maroney said. His voice wavered, betraying the sudden catastrophic realization that his long con had failed. "This isn't what it looks like. This is an independent venture. Off the books. It has nothing to do with the city's roots." Damien walked forward. He didn't stop until he was at the base of the loading dock, looking up at the older man. The air around Damien grew dense, the scent of burning ash expanding, suffocating the salt and diesel. It was a physical weight that forced 2 of Maroney's beta enforcers to take an involuntary step back. "I don't care about your side ventures, Albert. I care that you used my docks to run them while feeding me manufactured intelligence about South End disruptions to cover your tracks." Damien tilted his head. "You thought I was distracted. You thought my focus was slipping. Who told you?" Maroney demanded, the veneer of politeness cracking. His alpha pheromones flared defensively, a pathetic sour spike against Damien's overwhelming presence. "I paid off the harbor master. I bought the night cruise. Nobody knew about this route." Damien thought of Toby. He thought of the 19-year-old kid standing in his office connecting invisible dots because he knew the difference between the smell of dry textiles and raw fish on a cashmere coat. A kid who had spent his life making himself invisible had just dismantled a 70-year-old Mafia don's empire with a single observation. Damien felt a slow, dark smile pull at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "You underestimate the people who hold your coats, Albert," Damien said softly. Maroney stared at him uncomprehending. "Cole," Damien ordered, not looking away from Maroney. "Seize the trucks. Burn the trawler. If anyone resists, put them in the water." "And him?" Cole asked, gesturing to Maroney with the barrel of his rifle. "Strip him of his territory. He's retired as of tonight. If I see him inside city limits again, I won't be having a conversation with him." Damien turned his back on the loading dock and began walking back to his SUV. "Clean it up. I'm going home." He climbed into the back of the armored sedan. As the driver pulled away from the docks, the sky behind them lit up with the sudden violent orange glow of the fishing trawler catching fire. Damien leaned his head against the cold leather seat. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text from Cole. "Operation secured. No casualties. Maroney is gone." Damien locked the screen. He looked out the window at the blurred streetlights of the city. He owned all of it. Every brick, every shadow, every illicit dollar moving through the streets. For 10 years, it had been enough. It was his life. But right now, the only thing he wanted, with a primal, desperate intensity that made his chest ache, was to get back to a soundproofed office that smelled of chamomile tea and vanilla. It was 5 a.m. when Damien walked back into the alibi. The casino floor was dead. The overhead maintenance lights were on, casting a harsh, unromantic glare over the empty roulette tables. A cleaning crew was quietly running vacuums over the patterned carpets. The cloakroom was shuttered. Toby's uniform vest was folded neatly on the counter. Damien felt a sudden sharp twist of disappointment in his gut. He had told Toby to take the driver home. He had given a direct order. Toby was safe in his apartment in the Narrows. It was exactly where he should be. Damien walked down the dark corridor toward his office. He unlocked the heavy oak door and pushed it open. The desk lamp was on. Toby was curled up on the leather sofa asleep. He had taken off his dress shoes. He was wearing his white uniform shirt and the frayed scarf around his neck. His breathing was slow and even. Beside him, on the coffee table, was a fresh carafe of water, a clean glass, and a small, sterile first aid kit. He had waited. Damien closed the door quietly. The lock clicked. At the sound, Toby stirred. He blinked against the lamplight, sitting up quickly and rubbing his eyes. When he saw Damien standing by the door, the last remnants of sleep vanished. He immediately scanned Damien from head to toe, his eyes darting over the dark wool coat, looking for blood, for tears in the fabric, for any sign of injury. "You're back," Toby said. His voice was husky from sleep. "I told you to take the car home," Damien said. His voice was low, careful. He stayed by the door. He smelled of smoke, freezing rain, and violence. He didn't want to bring that near the boy. "Your driver told me he had orders to wait until the shift ended," Toby replied, swinging his feet off the sofa. "My shift didn't end. I was still on the clock." It was a weak excuse. They both knew it. Toby stood up. He walked over to the coffee table and poured a glass of water. He held it out. Damien finally moved. He crossed the room, unbuttoning his coat and tossing it over the back of his chair. He took the water glass from Toby. Their fingers brushed. The contact sent a sharp spike of heat through the cold air. "Maroney?" Toby asked quietly. "Handled," Damien said, taking a sip of the water. He set the glass down. "You were right, Toby. You saved me a war." "I just smelled fish, Mr. Reed," Toby murmured, looking down at his socks. "You fought the war." "Look at me." Toby slowly raised his head. Damien was looking at him with an intensity that stripped away the boss, stripped away the syndicate leader, and left only the alpha. It wasn't the terrifying, crushing presence he used on the streets. It was a heavy magnetic pull. It was a request. "You stopped calling me sir 2 months ago," Damien said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Stop calling me Mr. Reed." Toby swallowed hard. His heart was hammering against his ribs. The vanilla scent in the room began to spike, warming, sweetening, with a flush of deep instinctual arousal that he couldn't hide. "Damien." Damien closed the remaining distance between them. He stopped inches away. He didn't touch Toby. He kept his hands strictly at his sides. He knew the history of the boy in front of him. He knew the bruises that used to paint his ribs. Damien would never take a step that wasn't freely given. "I run a violent world, Toby." Damien said, his eyes locked onto Toby's. "There is blood on my hands. There will be more. I can't change what I am. But I can promise you that the violence will never touch you. I can promise you that the only thing you will ever find in this room is safety." Toby looked up at the man who had burned down a loan shark's empire just to stop him from hurting. He looked at the man who had brought his mother medicine, who had respected his space, who had listened to a Kochek boy when the rest of the world treated him like furniture. Toby reached up. His fingers trembled slightly as he found the knot of the frayed scarf at his throat. He pulled it loose. The fabric slipped away, falling to the Persian rug. It exposed the pale, unblemished skin of his neck and the sensitive, pulsing curve of his scent gland. It was the ultimate surrender, an Omega willingly baring their neck. But it didn't feel like a surrender. To Toby, it felt like taking off armor he no longer needed to wear. "I'm not asking for safety anymore, Damien," Toby whispered. "I'm asking for you." Damien's breath hitched. The immense ironclad control he held over himself fractured just a little. He reached out, his large hands gently framing Toby's face. His thumbs brushed across Toby's cheekbones. "Are you sure?" Damien asked. His voice was rough, reverent. "Once I claim you, you belong to the syndicate. You become a target. You become mine. I won't ever let you go." Toby leaned into the touch, closing his eyes. "Then don't let go." Damien leaned down. He pressed his lips softly against Toby's forehead, then his temple trailing down the line of his jaw. The scent of pine and ash wrapped completely around the vanilla, a solid, unbreakable wall of protection. When Damien's lips found the skin over Toby's scent gland, he paused. He waited for a flinch. He waited for hesitation. Toby's hands came up, gripping the lapels of Damien's suit jacket, pulling him closer. Damien opened his mouth and bit down. It wasn't a brutal, feral tearing of skin. It was a firm, deep pressure breaking the surface just enough to mix their blood to flood Toby's system, with his pheromones binding their instincts together in a biological lock that could never be undone. Toby gasped a sharp, breathless sound, but he didn't pull away. He anchored his hands into Damien's jacket, burying his face in Damien's shoulder, riding out the intense, dizzying wave of the bonds snapping into place. Damien pulled back slowly. He licked the small bead of blood from the bite mark, his eyes dark, entirely possessive, yet unbearably tender. He pulled Toby against his chest, wrapping his arms securely around the boy's back. Toby rested his head over Damien's heart, listening to the steady, heavy rhythm. The cynicism that had defined his 19 years of life was entirely gone, burned away in the span of a few months. by an alpha who didn't know how to be gentle with the world, but had learned how to be gentle with him. The city outside was waking up. By tomorrow, the rumors would spread. Maroney was gone. The Northport was secured, and the apex predator of the underground had taken a mate. The enforcers, the loan sharks, and the high rollers would soon realize that the slip of a boy holding their coats wasn't a nobody. He was the Don's bonded Omega, and he held the keys to the entire city. If you love this story of power protection and defying the odds, hit that like button to let the algorithm know. Do you think Toby will use his new position to clean up the syndicates? Or will Damien's dark world pull them both under? Drop your theories in the comments below. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow Omegaverse fans and hit subscribe with the notification bell turned on so you never miss a new story. We upload gritty, deeply human audio dramas every single week. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.